everybody? What's going on? How y'all doing? Welcome to today's edition of SWAC Talk, the show we cover the SWAC inside and out, and I'm your tour guide around the SWAC Seawells. And we're gonna take another look at these crazy men's basketball standings. We're gonna kind of keep this going until we get to a point where most of these races are settled, and I think a lot of these are not going to be settled until the final game of the season because there's a big jumble mess in the middle. So that's where most of the attention in this is going to go. Top spot, bottom spot are not that fluid. So mainly in that middle spot, we're gonna take a look at. Remember, the tournament takes 10 teams this season, so we're gonna look at everything one through 10, and go from there. So with that being said, man, y'all check out those socials: Facebook is Swag Talk, Twitter Swag Talk 76, Instagram Swag Talk. Like the video, comment, and share your thoughts on everything that's going on with the basketball season. I'm gonna talk a little bit of Legacy Bowl and stuff during the week on Swag Smoke, and so y'all keep it locked there for that kind of stuff. But this is my time of year, basketball. I love it, and this is the time that things are starting to become more crunch time. 5 games left, so not a lot of basketball left. Got three full weekends left. And so we're gonna see what's what. So let's take a look at the standings before we dive into each individual spot. Southern is atop the SWAC with a 12-1 record, 17-9 overall. They've won 2 games in a row. It is worth pointing out that Southern's on a historical run this season. They haven't been 12-1 ever, especially since the SWAC went to 18 games in the regular season. So regardless of what anybody else is doing, I think Southern should get the recognition at least for where they're at for the run that they're on. I mean, this is for Southern. This is a historical run, so I think that doesn't need to get lost in the shuffle with what anybody else is doing. Because I think the top team should always get recognition when they're making a run like this. Kind of like the year Valley went 17-1. I think it was like 2012 or something like that. They went 17-1. So I think when a team is on a run like this, you really need to recognize it beyond what anybody else is doing because they kind of shades the top spot. So Southern is sitting on top now. Whether they finish there, that's still a lot to remain to be seen. But in the here and now, I think they deserve some recognition. All right, now we come up to the number 2 team is FAMU. They're 9-4 in conference, 12-12 overall. They're on a 4-game winning streak. Jackson State's 9-4. 9-17 overall. They've won back on the winning track. Alabama State is 8-5, 12-14 overall. They've won 3 in a row. They really climbed up the standings lately. Texas Southern is 8-5, 11-15 overall. They've lost 1 game. Bethune-Cookman is 8-5, 11-15. They lost 2 in a row. Alcorn 8-5, 8-18. They've lost 1. Grambling back on the winning track. They're 6-7, 9-17 overall. Alabama A&M is on a 2-game winning streak. They're 5-8 and 9-17 overall. Prairie View still on that losing streak. They've lost 9 games in a row, dropping from 3-1 to 3-10, and they're 4-22 overall. Pine Bluff's on a 4-game losing streak. They're 1-12 and 4-22 overall. And Valley is 1-12 and 3-23 overall. They're also on a 4-game losing streak. So that's where we stand in the standings. So let's kind of take a look at what happened yesterday. If anything kind of changes and maybe what could happen after Saturday's game. So we're gonna kind of take this just step by step. Saturday, we're mainly looking at what happens on Saturday more than anything else. We're not gonna dive into the complete weekend yet. So taking a look at the standings, we're gonna we'll start at the bottom. We'll start at the bottom and make our way up. Right now, Pine Bluff is number 12. With a tie for Valley for 11, but Valley does have the tiebreaker over them, beating them by 6 points the first time that they played. So they're sitting in 12th spot. They get Prairie View at home on the road on Saturday, which is a big game. It's not a big game in terms of everybody else, but in terms of finishing last or even having the opportunity to make the tournament, this game is a must-win for Pine Bluff. Now they lost to Prairie View by 11 the first time, so they would need to go into the Baby Dome and win that game by 12 points to even give themselves a chance for the tiebreaker because they're probably gonna have to win out to get in. So you're looking at I would say at best they would need to probably win 4 out of 5 and finish at 5-13 and hope Purview can drop a few more of those games because they're right now they're just not in a good spot. So they if they if they're kind of just sitting in a lame duck spot with not a lot to do, but they need to win on Saturday to even give themselves any kind of thought of moving up. Now they could be eliminated if they get swept this weekend on their 2-game Texas 2-step, because then you're coming out of that at 1-14, and there's only 3 games left, and and you can't catch Prairie View at all. So they really have to win out. I think they really need to sweep this weekend if they can. I mean, they did beat TSU already once. Can they do it again? Who knows? But they have to. They have to. It starts Saturday. They have no room for error. Same thing with Valley. Valley's sitting at 11. They're 1-12. They could take Southern on Saturday. They have the tiebreaker over Pine Bluff with a 6-point victory. They trail in the tiebreaker against Prairie View, losing by 9. So when they play on Monday, they will have to beat the Panthers by 10 to give themselves a chance with tiebreakers. Same scenario for Pine Bluff. These two teams do play each other. So they still, they have opportunity. One of them is going to pick up a win there. So maybe at best you're looking at a 2-16 finish. But it's gonna take at least 5 conference wins to get there. So you're looking at least a 4. You're looking at winning 4 out of your last 5 and hoping Prairie View drops more than just the game against your team. So they both these teams need a lot of help, but they can be eliminated after Monday if they lose both of these games. So we'll have after Monday we'll probably have our 10 teams 10 teams set, and then we'll just have to worry about how we shuffle the standings. But this is the SWAC, so crazy things have happened. That's why I don't want to count either one of these teams out yet. You never know what's going to happen in this league. So, if they do lose out, both of these teams are gone. If they find a way to win, they're going to extend their season for another weekend. So we'll see what happens, especially with Prairie View not playing great. I mean, this is a team whose last victory, I think their last victory was Pine Bluff, or was it Valley? I mean, either way, their last victory was against one of these two teams. So they haven't beaten anybody since they went on the road and beat Pine Bluff on Monday, January 13th. So they haven't won since they had to come from behind and beat Pine Bluff 75-64. So the Panthers are ice cold, and so we'll move on to them. But right now, because of the teams below them being so bad, they're pretty solidly in the tournament at the 10 spot. Now at best, I see them probably going 2-3 in their last 5 games because they're probably going to be able to find a way to beat these two teams, and then I think they're going to finish like 5-13. They do get Pine Bluff on Saturday, so they have the tiebreakers over Pine Bluff and Valley, as I said before. They lost the season series to Alabama A&M 0-1. They split the season series with Grambling, who is in the 8th spot. But Grambling won the tiebreaker by beating the Panthers by 22 points last night. So they have a -4 point differential. They lose the tiebreaker to Bama State. So they don't have any upward mobility in terms of tiebreakers. So they will have to kind of, if they won out, they would finish eight and 10. So they will have, if they won out and A&M lost 3 games, if Grambling lost 4 games out of their last 5, that's probably the only way they're gonna jump those two teams is if they went out and those two teams kind of falter down the stretch. So I really think Prairie View's probably gonna be in that 10th spot, which means that they'll play the number 7 team in the tournament for a right to basically be the number 7 team against the number 2 team. So they're probably going to be one and done in the tournament. They're just not playing well. Their flaws have really been exposed in this season. The lack of depth, the lack of size, the lack of rebounding. They do have some guys who can score, but they just haven't been able to do a lot. So they don't have a lot going for them. But because of the fact that those two teams are below them are hard, then they are in the tournament. This is one of those teams that if you're just looking at making the tournament as a thing, they should be glad that they switched from 8 to 10 because they will be way out of it. Probably with little hope to get in if it was an 18 tournament. So that's the kind of stuff that you get when you expand the tournament. Next season they're taking all 12, so none of this will even matter in terms of who's going to be in and out. Who haven't won a game are gonna be in. So that kind of changes things a little bit. Moving up to number 9 is Alabama A&M. They're 5-8. They got a big game against Bethune-Cookman, who is kind of slid a little bit. So the Bulldogs coming off of a sweep of Pine Bluff and Valley. So that gives them, some wins in those season series. They do have the tiebreaker over Prairie View with a winning the only game in that series. They're 0-1 against Grambling with a minus 11-point differential. So they will need to go to Grambling and beat the Tigers by at least 12 when they play in the final weekend of the season. And then they have a 0-1 record against Bama State with a minus 4-point differential. Right now they're still 3 games out of that log jam. So it's going to take some wins for that tiebreaker to mean anything. They're probably stuck in that 9 spot because unless Grambling kind of fades and they do beat Grambling, they're probably going to be stuck in that spot. So it's important for them to beat Grambling when they play them toward the end of the season. That's further down the line. That's actually that's pretty far down the line. So it's not a lot you want to worry about with that. That game is actually on Thursday, March 6th. So they have a couple weekends before that game is there, but they have Bama State coming up on March 1st, and then they have FAMU and Bethune. So they have a 3-game stretch that they need to navigate. And none of these games are easy. These 3 teams are all teams that are ahead of them. Everybody they have left on their schedule is ahead of them. The Florida teams, Alabama State, Grambling, and Southern, all those teams are ahead of them in the standings. So they're going to have to knock off some people who are sitting on top to kind of make headway. And that Grambling game is a big way to make a move. But right now, until they get to that point, they're probably in that 9th spot with a slight chance to move to 8 if they can win and Grambling can lose. Speaking of Grambling, they're 6-7 right now. They get Southern at home on Saturday, which is a big game for them. Now, not necessarily for standings, but just because it's Southern and Grambling, and a win is always a good thing to keep you in the hunt with that log jam up in front of you. Somebody's gonna lose in all of that, and right now you're 2 games out of that. So you could start to move up next weekend. This weekend you're not really gonna move anywhere, regardless of what you do. Now, if you lose and A&M wins, then you're gonna still be ahead of them because of the tiebreaker, but you'll be tied at 6-8. So there, that's where you kind of start to look a little bit, look at sliding a little bit. Although you're probably not gonna go any lower than 9th, depending on what you do on Saturday. Like I said, they have the tiebreaker over Alabama A&M. They have the tiebreaker over Bama State too, so that's important. With a plus 10-point differential, but they are still 2 games behind that logjam. Like I said, they lost the season series to Alcorn and Jackson. They lost the season series to Texas Southern. They trail the season series to Bethune by 6, and they lead the season series against FAMU by 7. So FAMU's a little bit further ahead because they're 3 games ahead of Grambling, but stranger things can happen. Again, they close out with everybody. They close out with 5 games against teams that are gonna be in the tournament, starting Saturday with Southern. Then they go to Florida on Saturday and Monday. Saturday against Florida, and then Monday against Bethune-Cookman. Then they close out at home Thursday against Alabama, and then Saturday against Bama State. So they have the opportunity to make some movement if they can win, because knocking off of Alabama State, knocking off of Bethune-Cookman, knocking off of FAMU, knocking off Southern doesn't really change the standings, but it helps for momentum. So winning, if they can start to kind of put some things together, and 3 of those 5 are at home, so you have a decent chance to kind of make something happen. So Gramblin's I think they're in a good spot to move. They're not going to move really far, because I don't think you're going to be able to make the top 3 or 4 with 7 losses. Although it is possible, because right now the the top 3 teams have at least 5 losses, so it's not impossible. But I don't really see them moving that high. But I can see them moving into that middle range, and being a 4 or 5 seed, or maybe even a 6, depending on how things shake out. But I think they're in a decent spot for some upward mobility, because of the fact that they are playing pretty well. They did drop their game against TSU, which they led a good portion of that game, but they couldn't hold them off. And so they have been competitive against the teams ahead of them, but they just haven't really been able to beat a lot of them. And now we get to the biggest log jam of the standings, and that is our 8-5 teams. We have 4 of those, so we have a 4-way tie for 4th place. We dropped from a 5-way tie for 2nd place, because a lot of these teams, they played each other on Monday. So now we have a bigger log jam for 4th place, and those basically consist of the 4, 5, 6, and 7 seeds. So that's a big portion of the tournament tied right there. We'll start with Alabama State right now. Let's see. We'll go by the way the SWAC has it. They have Alcorn sitting at the 7th spot. So Alcorn, they play Jackson State on Saturday. So that's a big game right there. That's a 9-4 against an 8-5. They did lose to Jackson by 3 in their first matchup. So a win by 4 will get in that tiebreaker, and it would tie those 2 teams, at whatever place. So that is a big game with the opportunity to make a jump. You do hold the tiebreaker over Bama State because you beat them. So that's in your pocket. You have a tiebreaker against Bethune-Cookman. You swept them. You got swept by FAMU, and right now you're 0-1 against Texas Southern, with a 9-point differential. So Alcorn is actually in a good spot when you look at the tiebreakers. They only have 1 tiebreaker that they're losing, and that's they have 2, 1 against FAMU, and then they have the possibility of losing to Texas Southern. That tiebreaker, if they get swept, they need to beat TSU by 10 when they match up. So playing this one game this weekend and then not playing on Monday is gonna probably have them a half game ahead of whoever else loses. If somebody goes 0-2 this weekend, they'll be a half game behind behind Alcorn. So the Braves are in a good spot. I think if they can beat Jackson State, then that puts them in an even better spot. If they lose, they're not going to drop much. So they could even climb a spot. By even they may even climb a spot at the end of the weekend, because somebody may go 0-2 in that big jumble. So they're not out of a move up, and so that's very important. So this win is good for them. A win goes a long way. A loss doesn't kill them, but a loss does bring you closer to Grambling. But you did beat Grambling, so that helps a little, but that brings you a little bit closer to that spot, which puts you a little bit further down in the seedings. But that takes us to who the SWAC lists as the number 6 team, and that would be Bethune-Cookman. The Wildcats, they had a weekend that they needed. They needed this weekend, and they didn't get it. They got swept at home. They really, they were sitting tied in that 2nd place log jam. If they could have won last night, then they would still be tied for 2nd. Now they're sitting in the 6th spot, and I still think this is a team that can make some things happen. They do go on the road against Alabama A&M. That's going to be a tough matchup. Like I said, they're kind of cold, but I think the way they play, they still have a chance in pretty much every game that they have. And having a guy like Trey Thomas who can hit you for 30 can definitely be a big factor they're not, like I said, they're not a deep team. They did beat the Bulldogs by 14 at home, so that that does help. But when you go on the road that second time around, things kind of tighten up a little bit. And so we really need to see them bounce back in this game. They do lead the tiebreaker against Grambling at +6. They lead the tiebreaker against Bama State at +3. They lost the season series to Jackson State 2-0. They lost the season series to Alcorn 2-0. They lead the season series against FAMU +7, and they won the season series against Texas Southern. So they have some good tiebreakers in their favor. Those 4 losses to the Mississippi teams, that's gonna play a big factor because those 2 teams are not going anywhere. So that could be what hamstrings them down to that 6 or 7 spot because they got swept in those 2 matchups. But everybody else, they're in a good spot. And like I said, they play Bama State on Monday. So that can help some maneuverability for them and everybody else. Those Florida Alabama matchups this weekend are huge for the standings. So we'll those are probably the matchups that we're going to keep our eye out the closest on, because I think those 4 games are going to make a huge impact on where everybody moves, not just those teams. And then that takes us to our number 5 team, and that would be Texas Southern. They went 1-1 this weekend. They lost a tough game to Southern. Again, that they made a spirited comeback, but just couldn't get over the hump. They get Valley on Saturday, so they have a chance to kind of right the ship. Valley and Pine Bluff this weekend. They did lose to Pine Bluff, so it is not a given. But at home, I do like them in both of these games, so they could come out of this at 10-5 and be looking really good, depending on what happens in front of them. TSU's a team who, like I say, they're built for March, so they're not really sweating where they finish, but obviously you don't want to go in the tournament cold. So I think that's one of those narratives that we need to kill, that TSU don't care about the regular season, because they care. Coach Jones and his guys are very, very competitive. They don't want to lose, but if they drop a game, they're not gonna pull their hair out. But of course, you don't want to go into the tournament on a losing streak. You definitely don't want to go into the tournament with losses to teams who are very bad on your record late in the season. So they're gonna go out and give it their all and try to play themselves into a decent spot in the tournament. So I think they're looking pretty good. They did sweep Grambling. They beat Bama State in their only matchup. They lead Alcorn with a +9 point differential. They lead JSU with a +8 point differential. They did lose the season series to FAMU and Bethune, and they lost the season series to Southern last night. So that kind of eliminates them in terms of a tiebreaker if Southern was to really crash and burn. But they're in a good spot. Like I said, other than losing to the Florida teams, they're in a good spot with a lot of the teams that they're battling. So if they can come out of this weekend with 2 wins, I think they're gonna be one of those teams sitting at least 4th, depending on what the 2 and 3 seed teams do. But they're in a good spot for a good seeding in the tournament, and I think they're gonna play hard. And I think they're gonna get it because this is not a team that they're not gonna shoot the lights out, but they play good defense. They force a lot of turnovers. They get a lot of steals. They have some guys who are hard workers on the defensive end, and they have a guy McClain who can take over a game if he gets hot. So they are, and they coach by one of the best coaches in the conference. So you never count that out. And so they're biding their time. They kind of like the Spurs used to be, where they're not really super concerned with winning, a division or winning, the conference, but they're more focused on winning in the tournament, and so they're gonna play, well enough to get in and well enough to put themselves in a good spot and then go from there. And that takes us to our number 4 team right now, and that's Alabama State. Hornets, by virtue of everybody in front of them kind of having, a couple rough weekends and them getting a couple upsets, find themselves in a really good spot. And they're number 4 right now at 8-5. They do get FAMU, who they just beat a couple of weeks ago in Tallahassee. So, they did win that game by 1. But that is a win that they have under their belt. So they know this is a team they can beat. And now they're playing them at home, so they have a chance to really shake things up if they were to pull off the victory here. Um, they did lose to Bethune by 3, so that's a tiebreaker that could be favorable. You know, what I mean, they could beat them by 4 at home, and so a 2-0 weekend again for Bama State has you almost in the possibility of number 3 if JSU wins, because they did lose to JSU in the only matchup, so they can't. Unless JSU loses and Bama State wins both of their games, they would be a half a game ahead of Jackson State, because JSU would be 9-5 and Bama State would be 10-5. So they do have a chance to be number 2 if they come out of this with a win, with a winning weekend. So this is a very big weekend for Bama State. This is probably the weekend that's gonna really put them in the forefront, and it could be a weekend that solidifies them as a legitimate contender to the title, or it could be a weekend that fades them back, because they do lose both of these games. They're going to be 8-7, and they could be they'll be at least a half a game ahead of Grambling, because Grambling will be 7-7 if Grambling wins on Saturday. So they could easily be number 7 again, or they could be number 2, depending on what happens. So I think they're probably the team with the most to gain and the most to lose. They're probably the team who has the most going on for them this weekend, because they do have 2 big games. If they split them, then it's no shakes that hurt them. But you definitely want to win them both because you're at home. If you lose them both, then you're really gonna find yourself fading back in the standings and looking at maybe a third matchup against FAMU if things keep going the way they are if you're number 7. But number 7 puts you in that play-in too. So, you don't really want to play, you don't really want to be in a spot where you have to beat a team like Prairie View to get into the tournament. Well, to get into the main bracket. And because, Prairie View could get hot at any time. Guys like Bush and Petway could get hot at any time. Marcel Bryant, those guys can make things happen at any time. And this team could be playing better by the end of the season. So you don't really want to face that number 10 team just to get to play the number 2 team. So this weekend is huge for the Hornets. They could, like I said, they can either go from 4th to 2nd or 4th to 7th or anywhere in between. They have a lot of wiggle room to happen this weekend, but mainly our main focus is Saturday against FAMU. That takes us to our number 3 team, which is Jackson State. But because they got swept by FAMU, that puts them at a 3 spot instead of the 2nd spot. They get a big game against Alcorn. They beat the Braves by 3 in Lorman to start the season. JSU's still a dangerous team. They can score inside and out. And so, they just had a bad matchup with FAMU. And that happens with teams. Sometimes you just have a bad series with teams. That doesn't mean you're bad. It just means sometimes the team that you're playing just for whatever reason you can't get past them. And so, you have a chance if things hold the way they are, you have a chance to meet them in the 2nd round and get another chance. But right now, like I said, they're 9-4, so a win will put them at 10-4. And depending on what FAMU do, they're either gonna be a half game ahead of somebody, or a half game behind the Rattlers. So they'll probably be no worse than 3rd, depending on what happens. They could be 2nd, depending on what happens. So they have a good opportunity to move up a little bit. And I do think being 1 or 2 is an advantage, because you're going to be playing a team who probably going to already been played, and it might be a late game. I don't know if they released the times and everything of the bracket yet, but you could be playing a team coming off of a late matchup and they had to play early and they're going to be tired. We saw it last year with Bethune-Cookman. So it's not impossible that playing an extra game is gonna, especially if it's a emotional and physical game, like against a desperate team who's trying to extend their season. You could be getting a team who coming off of a game like that. So having that second seed or that 1st seed, I think that is the only advantage that you have in this tournament, since there are no home games for top seeds. But like I said, JSU, looking at what they have in terms of tiebreakers, they beat Bama State 1-0. They beat Grambling 1-0. They lead Alcorn by 3, which that'll be played on Saturday. They lost the season series to FAMU 0-2. They swept Bethune-Cookman. They're 0-1 against Texas Southern with a -8-point differential. So they have some tiebreakers in their favor, but the one that's really important, because that's the team they tied with, they lost that one. So if they want to have an opportunity to play a team to play that team that wins that little play-in game, so to speak, they need to find a way to get in front of FAMU without being tied with them. And speaking of the Rattlers, they're 9-4. They're playing good ball. They would, to me, they are the B story to the conference right now, and not taking nothing away from them, because Coach Crary had these guys playing good ball. They were picked like 11th, and now they're second. So that is a huge accomplishment. That's a huge story. But again, like I said, with a team that's 12-1 at this point, that has never been 12-1 before, I think you can't overshadow that, regardless of who made what move. But the Rattlers are playing good ball. They shoot the three well. They don't do a lot of things great, but they shoot that three well, and they've been just winning games. They've just been finding a way to win. And they swept Jackson State with a huge feather in their cap. And I think that and the win over TSU is what kind of propels them more into that stratosphere. So, they have some tough matchups down the stretch. They get Bama State on Saturday. The only, that's the last team to beat them. They get Alabama and them, who's gonna be a team who you never know what you're gonna get from the Bulldogs. They can score a lot of points, or they can kind of falter. So those are two important games on the road. They're big. You don't have a ton of tiebreakers in your favor. You do have an important one against Jackson State. You do win the season series against Texas Southern. You win the season series against Alcorn. You trail the season series to Bama State by 1, but if you beat them by 2, then you got that. And it might not even matter, because if you beat Bama State, they're gonna have 6 losses at minimum. So that probably won't even be a factor, unless you fade. They trail Grambling by 7 points. And that may not matter, because Grambling has 7 losses right now. So you're 3 games ahead of them, so that might not even matter. The one that's important is Bethune-Cookman. You trail them by 7. So depending on what happens this weekend, you could still be tied with them, or they could be in reaching room to grab you. So you need to play when you play them last. So who knows what's gonna happen between now and then? But that could be an important tiebreaker. If the Wildcats keep winning and if the Rattlers keep winning, because none of this means anything if your team doesn't win. So, tiebreakers don't mean crap if you don't win. And that takes us to Southern. Not going to spend a lot of time on Southern, because right now they're 12-1, and they have to lose 3 games before they even get into a tie with anybody. So they have a big 3-game stretch coming up in the next 2 weeks at Grambling, at FAMU, at Bethune. That's not easy. They could easily go 0-3 on that trip, or they can go 3-0, or they can go 2-1, or they can go 1. They can do anything on this trip, because those are 3 tough places to play, and those are 3 teams who are battling for their tournament seeding lives, and none of those teams are going to lay down. And you close out with Bama State and Bama A&M, so this is a tough finish for Southern. And you played all these teams before. They're going to want to get back. I mean, FAMU definitely going to want revenge for the way they lost that early game. Grambling going to want revenge for the way that game ended in Baton Rouge. So you're walking into a fire against Grambling. Grambling's going to ambush you, because they definitely want to prove that ending of the game should never have happened. And so it's Southern and Grambling. So Southern's going to have to navigate a lot of hurdles before we can say that they are the champ. But sitting right now, at this point in time, on February 18th, Southern is the best team in the conference. Where we consider them when we get to March 8th, that's a whole different story. Like I said, I want to live in the here and now. So right now, Southern's the best team in the league. If they lose 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5, then they nowhere near the best team in the league. So if they are the best team in the league, they're gonna win the conference in the next 2 weeks. If they're not, then somebody else will. And that's the intriguing part. That's why I don't want to just stamp them as anything, because we've seen Southern, be 10-2 late into the season and then finish 13-5. So that has happened, and so you can't ignore recent history. And until they can get over these humps on these road games, you have to look at it as that. So with that being said, man, I'm your tour guide around the SWAC Seawell, signing out, and I will catch y'all on the rebound. Peace.